So for 3 years, over 3 years on my YouTube channel, I have been calling out modern feminists. That is what I've spent the majority of my time doing because my channel has mostly been devoted to looking at Me Too hoaxes, situations where I feel like men have been falsely accused by women of sexual harassment, sexual assault, etc. And so I started by covering the Johnny Depp case, and then I got into covering others. And so I am very, very well aware of all of the flaws that we can call out in modern feminism. And I have been doing it specifically focusing on Me Too and also focusing on women's responsibility for their sexuality, their sexual encounters, their romantic associations, even when, and particularly when those relationships go sour, or as in the case of a number of these celebrities, um, when there's a divorce or a split, or when someone didn't get what they wanted out of the relationship. And then you have these cases of all of these women making up false allegations to get these guys, to get them monetarily, to get them in some ways through the legal system, and then of course to get them in the court of public opinion. But I myself politically, and I've talked about this before, I am a centrist in, I think, the best sense of the word, not in a wishy-washy sense of like, I can't really make up my mind and I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm a centrist, but like in the sense that I don't think it makes sense, y'all, for an intelligent person's beliefs to line up totally within one tribe. And I know I'm going to insult a number of you here, but I'm just going to say this. If you are a conservative or you're a progressive, you're right wing, left wing, or whatever, and you're in a particular camp and all of your beliefs line up with what's popular, what is currently popular in that camp, then I'm just not sure you're doing a lot of deep thinking. I'm just going to put that out there. So I know that the word centrist is anathema to a number of people on both sides, in both camps, but that's what I am. And so I have a number of views that are on the right. I have a number of views, yes, that are on the left, and a number of views that, somewhere on a weird place on the map. But just because I think there are a lot of problems with modern feminism, and let me just be clear with particularly a focus on victimization in modern feminism, which is the thing that I am most critical of about modern feminism and that I've been speaking out against for over 3 years. The inordinate, problematic focus, at times tunnel vision, on victimization, female victimization, and the patriarchy, and all of these different Me Too hoaxes. Did you know that, by the way, speaking of cases I've covered, did you know that guy in Spain, Luis Rubiales, I was just reading about this the other day. Remember the guy who got a little too excited over his female team winning the World Cup, which is a huge fucking deal over in Europe. Over here, I'm just like, yawn or whatever. Soccer's boring. But he got really excited. And it was very obvious to anyone who watched that video that that was not a sexual assault, that he was not getting his sexual jollies out of it. He was proud, he was happy, what have you. And he pulls that woman to him in a quick, like 1 second, blink and you'll miss it, kiss on the lips. Do you know that he is facing 2 years in prison now? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's what he's been charged with. And that's the penalty. That is apparently, I read that the other day, that is apparently the penalty that the government, Spanish government, the prosecutor wants. 2 years in prison for that. Ridiculous. But anyway, I've been calling out shit like that on my channel. I've been calling out this absurd focus on victimization and how it's not feminist in the classical sense of the word. But I have been truly, to get to my point now, I have been truly baffled and astonished that in 2024, we are months out from a major election that a lot of conservatives and a lot of right wingers are terrified is going to get stolen from them anyway. And I don't even want to wade into that. I'm not educated enough on all of that to talk about it. Honestly, I don't know. I think it's pretty obvious that our electoral system and voting mechanisms are pretty messed up. And I think there's a wide avenue for fraud within that. So I don't find it like a shocking or crazy idea that you could have a lot of people voting who are not supposed to be voting, particularly with mail-in balloting, whatever. But I don't want to get into that. Here's my point. You have all of these people on the right. And when I say on the right, I'm also talking about more independent voices and thinkers and people like I would consider myself, who at this moment are somewhat right of center. on this current political map. Okay. And that's what I say. I'm independent. I'm a centrist. I'm also somewhat right of center. But there are so many people on the right who are just terrified that the right's going to lose this election. And yet, and they will even say, and yeah, we have a big problem with female voters. We're doing really well with the men, but we are just, it seems like the right, from the right's perspective, hemorrhaging female voters. And so you would think that months out from an election, with this terror of losing an election and this understanding that really the right, in order to guard against any kind of election fraud, they really need to bring in a lot of votes. It can't be some razor thin election, right? You would think with all of that they would not be trying to rile up women unnecessarily months out from an election. And when I say unnecessarily, what I mean is, birth control pills, hormonal birth control, it has been around since, yes, the 60s, correct? Why is it just now that suddenly you have all of these thinkers on the right, all of these commentators, suddenly that is a major talking point for a number of them online? And like, you had Charlie Kirk. So Gavin Newsom recently, who you all know can't stand Gavin Newsom, and it's a sad day when that man says anything that I agree with. That's a sad sign of the times and where the right is at on this women's stuff right now. But Gavin Newsom was pointing out that Charlie Kirk, and I'm not going to say he's the biggest guy on the right, but he is representative of a number of prominent right-wing commentators and activists. Charlie Kirk was at an event, and he was, and someone apparently asked him, or the topic came up, why is the right having such a problem attracting or keeping female voters? Why? Particularly younger women, but in general, why are the women such a problem? And Charlie Kirk starts talking about birth control and how birth control has fucked up women's brains. Now, let's take the whole science and the debate about the science and the debate about birth control just for a minute. Let's take that out of it. And I'm not dismissing it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't consider that if we're talking about, modern women. But let's take that out for a second, and let's just look at the sheer insanity of months before an election making that a primary talking point and also a primary explanation for why women are abandoning the Republican Party. Really? It's because so birth control that has been around and widely used going back decades. You're saying that it's just recently been causing these women to go haywire and they're leaving the Republican Party? I mean, to me, it's laughable and it's insulting at the same time. And, if it were just Charlie Kirk's comment, that's not a big deal. But if you go on right-wing Twitter and you look at right-wing Twitter, you will see that this disdain for and I would say almost like hysterical outrage over birth control now, that is a main point of debate, a main talking point for a number of commentators on the right. And here's the thing, it's not just birth control. But as you know, abortion is a significant issue, and it certainly has been since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And, that it has gotten to the point now where in some states, IVF is in danger. In vitro fertilization is in danger because of the extreme nature of some of this legislation that is getting pushed in some of these states from the right-wing sector. And so, here's the thing about IVF, and I've talked about this online on Twitter, but there are, for every child conceived and birthed through IVF, you have a number of embryos that are ultimately destroyed or that sit in a kind of biomedical purgatory for decades and decades and decades until they're destroyed. Now, people like to talk about what God intended. Well, God didn't intend us to kill our babies before they were born. Or if you get pregnant, if there's a fertilization, a number of them are even against birth control pills for that reason, because sometimes, not typically, but sometimes apparently, the way that hormonal birth control works is that if there is fertilization and it is implanted in the woman, through the process of pregnancy, then even if it's only like a day old, even if you can't even see it, even if you need a microscope to see it, if you get an abortion, if you terminate that pregnancy, then you're killing like a baby, basically. That's the thinking. Well, so IVF which so many people are using now. Yes, from certain socioeconomic classes, but which so many people are using now, and so many conservatives are using. I know so many people. I'm here in Texas. I know so many conservative families that have tried IVF, have had children through IVF, and don't realize that they are the equivalent of women getting abortions. I mean, if you look at it as like every life is sacred, no matter how primitive and no matter how early in the life cycle, it is sacred. Do you really think that God intends for sacred souls to be kept in perpetual stasis in a lab only to be eventually destroyed? So that's God's plan, but those sluts out there getting abortions, that's not God's plan. I mean, so here's here's where it's getting crazy is that you have IVF now endangered by this agenda. If we're talking about a really hardcore right-wing agenda. And I understand with abortion, there's a period where it becomes a lot more gray, and you look at a woman who's in a late stage of abortion or that third trimester, and the fetus that she's carrying more or less looks recognizable as a baby, as the infant it's going to be. I understand it's not crazy that people have more of a problem with that, and I understand that there's a gray. Even though I'm okay with abortion through all trimesters. And I could talk about that later. But I understand that's a more extreme position. And I understand a lot of you are like, well, if it's a few days old, okay, I get it. A few weeks old, whatever. But if we're talking about, into the seventh month or whatever, it's a problem. I get it. Okay. And I'm not saying it's a crazy view to be against that or to be uncomfortable with that. But the extremeness of many people's positions on the right. And so women look at this, women like me, who are centrist, but have been at times very favorable to the right. And I've been very open about the fact that I voted for Trump in 2016. I didn't hesitate to do it. I voted for Trump in 2016. I didn't vote in the last election, not out of any principle, but honestly, my life was just crazy at that point. I was pissed at Trump for the way that in some ways he had handled the COVID stuff. And so I wasn't enthusiastic about voting for him. And then also I couldn't bring myself to, why would I vote for Biden? I'm sorry. And so I just didn't vote, right? I voted for Obama in '08. I even walked around knocking on doors like old school for Obama because I was so excited about the prospect of having not only the first black president but turning the page on the George W. Bush war years and all of that, right? So my point is, I am the kind of female swing voter who is very open to a lot of right-wing ideology. I consider myself like you, Andrew. I consider myself a libertarian. Most of the time, I just want the government to leave us alone, including when it comes to abortion. So I am exactly the kind of voter that is a swing voter, a female voter who would be favorable to the right, and who might, if I vote for Trump. And yet, I swear, y'all, whenever I get on Twitter, I find something that I don't just want to say it makes my blood boil, because that just feeds into the idea of, oh yeah, the crazy women that can't handle their emotions. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But I mean, like, I read things coming from some of these conservative commentators and activists, and I'm just like shaking my head. Why is it necessary to keep bringing up over and over how women after 30 turn into useless hags either? I don't understand. Where is the that's what I was trying to say earlier. Where is the political strategy in this? Let's just let's take the merits of the conversation off the table for a moment, and whether these things that are being stated are true or not true or whatever. Let's just concede that. I just don't understand the political strategy here. I don't. Months out from an election, telling women over and over that they're a bunch of old hags after they turn 30. Did you know that old women vote? Were you aware that middle-aged and older women are a significant voting bloc? We're not going to repeal. Someone said it today, and I appreciated it, or yesterday on Twitter. I think it was Ashley St. Clair. Stop talking about repealing the 19th Amendment. Stop. It's not going to happen, okay? The funny thing is that I have a number of feminists who attack me from the left, who are big Me Too feminists, believe all women feminists. And they attack me a lot for being against the female right to vote, because someone tracked down some quote from me on Twitter years ago where I said that the right to vote for women had been a huge disaster. And you can look at something and you can say that the effects have generally not been good, because generally, newsflash, I am more to the right. I am more libertarian, and women tend to not vote for those things. Women tend to be in their voting less libertarian. They want more government intervention. So you could say abortion is kind of an exception to that, maybe to the extent that a number of women are pro-choice. I know there are a lot that are pro-life too. So I get it. I share people's frustration at times with the way that women vote, but in terms of political strategy, why are we alienating women unnecessarily? These are not the major issues. Birth control is not the major issue, or it's not even on the top 10 or 20 of major issues that we should be concerned with right now. I'm sorry, abortion isn't either. It's not. And Trump knows this. You know, Trump is pro-choice. He was pro-choice until he decided to get into politics. And then he knew that you cannot make it in the Republican Party. You cannot be successful unless you go pro-life. So he flipped. He flipped. And he had to do it. I get it. But Trump's pro-choice, and I'm sure he's paid for a lot of abortions. And he knows there are some things that he has said over the past couple of years to indicate that he knows that abortion is a political loser for the right. And you can see that he wishes that he didn't have to talk about it. Now, I know he put people on the Supreme Court who ended up voting to overturn Roe v. Wade. But I'm just saying, I don't think Trump is entirely comfortable with the right-wing position on this either. But people will say, well, if I think abortion is murder, how dare you tell me not to talk about it? How dare you tell me not to? Okay, I get it. If you really think that that is an equally legitimate life, if you look at a fetus at, month 1 or whatever, or 2, and you look at that and you say that is the same as an infant that's just been born. Okay. I mean, it's a subjective thing. But okay, abortion, fine. Talk about that. But what is this insistence on talking about how women become useless hags after 30? You just see it a lot with all these commentators. Oh, they hit the wall, they hit the wall, they hit the wall. A few months ago, I saw an extremely attractive conservative female commentator. I don't want to be more specific, but whose show I've been on. Extremely attractive. This woman, I would say, I mean, we could have a debate, but I would say this woman, you see her out and about, you would say, 9, 8 or 9 or whatever. Extremely attractive, still young, still in her early 20s. And she posted something on Twitter about basically, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't exactly remember, but being afraid because she knows that the wall is coming very soon. The wall's not coming very soon unless you just blow up and get really fat. Not for you, sweetie. You're going to be attractive a long time. And I understand, yes, that women's reproductive capacity, it lessens over time. And yes, there are a number of women who end up waiting too late. And I'm all for people being educated about that. But also, there's actually a lot of scientific evidence showing that that window isn't as narrow as the propagandists would make us believe. And I know stuff is anecdotal, but I've had a number of friends who had totally naturally, without any kind of hormones or in vitro or anything, had their first child just in the last few years. The 37, one of them was 41. Again, I know that's not the norm, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm saying, like, there are big debates going on about these things that are much deeper than the propaganda. And it's just a shame that it's the propaganda that always has the loudest voice, that you go on Twitter and it's the people who are making the most extreme statements. Just like with birth control. Yes, birth control, it has a number of risks. And there are all these people saying they didn't know. Did you not read the packaging? It's like all that handout. I got on birth control when I was 18 or 19 and ended up getting off the pill because, yeah, I didn't like the nausea and I didn't like the acne. So I don't deny it has effects. Everything has effects. And there are some really negative ones. How many of you are on stimulants every day for your ADHD and you think that's totally A-okay? But birth control, ooh. How many of you are on hormone replacement therapy? You're in middle age or you're older, but birth control, ooh. How many of you taken Viagra? Why aren't the Republicans talking about Viagra? Viagra is actually riskier than hormonal birth control. I looked up the other day the health risks associated with the abortion pill. Now, I'm not talking about the birth control pill now. I'm talking about the actual abortion pill, which increasingly a lot of people are using in the privacy of their homes at an early stage in their pregnancy. But I wanted to research it, not because I'm having an abortion, and I'm 43, so I am at the end of whatever spectrum, whatever spectrum there is, probably, fertility. But no, I looked it up because I was wanting to educate myself because people are talking about it a lot. And did you know that, yes, in a very, very rare cases, you can die of the abortion pill, but guess what is much, much riskier and more people die of, and per use is much riskier? Viagra. Why are Republicans not sounding the alarm on Viagra and what it's doing to our culture? Maybe God didn't intend men to be having lots of sex in their 80s. Now that we're talking about what God intended, does God want 85-year-olds running around with hard-ons? I want us to ponder that question. And by the way, while we're talking about the wall, some of you men can keep talking about the wall. The wall. Oh, after 30. Well, let me just say, I've seen a bunch of men post 30, and you guys, you ain't looking great either, by and large. Now, I'm lucky. I'm with a guy who looks basically the same as when we started dating. And I appreciate that about him. And I hope that I'm basically the same as well. But I just have to be honest, there is a big wall for men too. And a lot of are hitting it pretty early. And I know what you're going to say, men's rights activists or whatever. You're going to say, but it's not the same because women are hypergamous and they're more into stability and and wealth and financial factors. Well, a lot of you aren't doing that great in those departments either. It's very interesting. I see a lot of men online yapping about things like that, and then you look into their lives and you're not seeing anything particularly financially compelling there either. There's one in particular I'm not going to mention by name because he's very vindictive, but he's just and he's not so much a right winger as just a huge men's rights activist and is constantly talking about how worthless women are and there's basically useless and blah 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 and not like men who bring the financial stability and blah, blah, blah. And then it turns out someone did an investigative report on him and interviewed his children and stuff like that, and it turns out he's like a deadbeat dad and has been broke his whole life and whatever. So that's one thing. But you guys can tell yourselves that women don't care about your appearance and that when they have sex with you, they're just completely, it's off their radar, whether you've got a beer belly or a dad bod or you don't, or whatever your defects, your personal physical defects might be. You can tell yourself that women don't care, but they see it. And on some level, I can tell you that they care very much or it makes a deep impression. Now, they might look at you and say, but this is a good man, and this man has been with me, and we made, for better or worse, and et cetera, et cetera. And all of those things are very powerful and important and great. But I'm telling you, even Elon Musk, with his billions and billions of dollars, when he strips off his clothes, and I know he's on Ozempic now and he's had a lot of plastic surgery, but when he strips off his clothes in his earlier form and there's all that fat and flab and all that hanging off and all of that, I promise you, no matter how much the woman might think about all the money he's got, she still sees it. It's there and it has an impression. So, a lot of people say that women should not be getting upset about these comments about them hitting the wall. I see some people that I respect and women actually saying this, like, well, no, Charlie, some of these guys like Charlie Kirk, he was just pointing out that women do hit a wall in a way at 35, or they start to, or they're not as attractive as they used to be. What's the big deal? Don't get so emotional about that. Don't get so emotional about that. What if I started a regular show where each week I just ranted about how men's bodies degenerate as they age? Oh, you're middle age now, so you can't get it up as much, you can't go as long, or you got the dad bod and the belly flab, and you're losing your hair, baldies, blah, blah, blah. I mean, what if I were just to do that every week? Do you think that my male audience would love it? Or do you think over time I might lose some of my male audience? Well, I can tell you it's the latter. And so for me, when I look at the GOP and I look at a number of these right wing commentators, and I think they can't see the forest for the trees on this stuff because there's just no need to be talking about this stuff so much or saying it in such an abrasive way. And I really appreciated Savannah Hernandez, whose work I watch at times, and I must say, a very beautiful woman and also an extremely eloquent, sharp witted woman. And she was talking about the fact that the right wing, needs to adjust the way that it speaks to women, because she says women are, in her view, they are more emotional. And I don't think that it's anything controversial or anything I would disagree with to say that, generally speaking, in a general sense, women are more emotional. You have, as with everything, you have some people who go against type, outliers, whatever. But in general, I agree with that. But Savannah Hernandez, a right-wing commentator, she was saying, guys, if it's true that women are more emotional, then we should understand that you can't speak to them in such an abrasive way about, you're turning into ugly hags post 30 or post 35, or railing against, or what I would point out, railing against anything other than, full-time motherhood or traditional submissive marriage, these kinds of things. You can't harp on them in such a way as to emotionally inflame or turn off women. Now, she's making that argument. Here's how I would put it, and I said it on Twitter just a minute ago. If women really are that fucking crazy, why the hell are we trying to get them riled up? Why the hell is the right wing trying to get them so riled up months before an election? If they're that crazy, and if birth control has fried all these women's brains so much that they're just like on a hair trigger, and you don't want to say the wrong thing, or psh, then why are we behaving in this way? Why is the right, I should say, behaving in this way? Do you know how I know that men, right-wing men in particular, in this instance, are not that smart and not that superior? Because the way that they handle women, the way that they're talking to women, it's not indicative of higher intelligence or an ability to keep one's emotions under control. I see a lot of men out there with a lot of resentment toward women and a lot of popping off online to no avail. I had breakfast today at a little diner down the street. And my server, I use the old school term waitress. I'm a waitress, as a lot of you know, server, but I'm old school, so I still say waitress. I've been told that that's antiquated in the field, actually. But my waitress was kind of groaning a little bit. I mean, she was very, very nice and very capable, but she was kind of, at one point, she was kind of touching her back and sort of groaning a little bit or whatever. And you know what she said? Totally unsolicited by me. I promise. She starts talking about how, since she had her child, I think she had 2 kids. Since she had her last child, she's been having all these back problems because the pregnancy was so strenuous that I think she had a slipped disc or something, some kind of back issue. And she was talking about how it had been so hard on her and was continuing to be hard on her. And you know what I thought about? I thought about all of those right-wing commentators online who just completely dismiss how difficult pregnancy is for a lot of women, and childbirth, and how hard they are on women's bodies, and that they too carry a ton of risks. And it's not just, it's not just men saying this stuff. I mean, I got into a fight with Chrissy Mayer, or Mar. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name still. I just see it online. But I got into a fight with Chrissy Mayer about abortion. She made a joke about abortion that I didn't think was very funny, and I called her out on it, and I didn't even think she would respond, but it actually started this thing between us, and then she ended up retweeting me with a sarcastic remark and whatever. It wasn't a good exchange for either of us, in my opinion, honestly, and I regret it. But at one point, I pointed out how I thought that it was barbaric to force women who don't want to have children to carry a child and birth it, that I just find that barbaric. And someone responded in the comments and they said, "Oh, yeah, it's really barbaric to do what nature intended your body to do." And Chrissy Mayer responded and said, "Oh, yeah, it's been really hard not to drink alcohol all these months. Such torture." And I just have to say, I really hate the dismissiveness of those answers, even if you do disagree with me on abortion, or you think that women should have to carry every fetus to term. Because pregnancy, and tell me if I'm wrong, women, because I've never had a baby, but in general, for a lot of women, okay, pregnancy and childbirth are really fucking hard on their bodies. And so I asked my waitress out of the blue, since she had brought it up, I said to her, I said, "I've never had kids before and I'm not going to have any." I said, "You said you have some. Is pregnancy hard on the body? Like, what, pregnancy and childbirth? Like what was it like for you?" I said, "Did you have difficult pregnancies or difficult births?" And she starts listing for me. This really happened. People are going to say, "Oh, name something that didn't happen for 10, Alex," or whatever. But like, it's not that crazy of a story, right? She starts listing for me all of the things that got fucked up in her body and continue to be fucked up from pregnancy and childbirth. And a prolapsed anus, that I don't even know how that happens with when you're having a baby, except everything gets all ripped up and weird down there and whatever, I guess. But like, even like having to have surgery for prolapsed anus related to childbirth, and back problems, and I can't even remember, gastrointestinal problems. Like, I can't even remember all of it. And I have had a number of friends who have basically PTSD from traumatic birth experiences, and look, y'all, there are still, even with modern medicine, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. I understand that it's not the norm for people to die in childbirth now, to get debilitating conditions necessarily from it, but it does happen. And Tim Pool posted, I believe yesterday or this morning, he posted about the fact that hormonal birth control can cause neurological problems. And yes, of course, there's all kinds of side effects that people can have. Again, it's a lot of it's right there if you want to look. But then I did a little Google search to make a point, and I typed in pregnancy and childbirth, neurological problems. And what do you know? When you Google that, you get this long list and all of these articles about all of the neurological problems, some of them extremely serious, that can develop as a result of pregnancy and childbirth, many of which may not go away. Having something, and guys, this may be hard for you to comprehend, so I want you to think hard with me here. I want you to put on your thinking caps, all right? But having a creature that is not normally in your body, that gets implanted in your body, and then over the course of months grows to a fairly gigantic proportion, and a process which makes your hormones, talk about hormones going crazy, go all kinds of crazy, and all of these delicate systems in your body getting like kind of shifted around or affected in various ways, and then basically having that child, in a metaphorical manner of speaking, clawing its way out of your body while you bleed out and get ripped up. I want you to think really hard and try to use your powers of empathy, guys, here, to imagine that might be a lot to deal with. Maybe not for everyone. I also know women who've had easy births. But a lot of women just don't complain because they're like, I want this baby. This is how I get the baby. Why would I even complain? Am I going to get anything out of complaining to the man in my life about how much this sucks? I know a couple of men actually who felt very traumatized watching the birth of their children because of what their wives went through. So I just don't understand people who say it's nature, it's what God intended, so it's not a big deal to do it. Nah. And I'm tired of the nature argument, and I've said this before. All of you need to look up the birth process for a hyena, and then you need to tell me that nature is not barbaric. Because hyenas, they have to give birth out of their clitorises. Their shit gets all kind of fucked up. It's a really painful experience. 60% of the cubs, if that's what you call them, of the little hyenas die in the process of being birthed. And up to 30% of hyena females die in the process of birthing. Also in the hyena, the birth canal, unlike humans, at one point in the birth canal, it does a bizarre perpendicular turn. And so the hyena cub has to do this like complete turn, this very narrow opening here, and then they get pushed out. And then a bunch of hyenas die in this process. So what I'm trying to say to you is that it is very well known that one of the pressure points, listen to me here. If we're going to talk about science, okay, all of you starting talking about science with birth control, the science, it's making them crazy. Okay. But if we're going to talk about that, you have to understand too, that a little bit of evolutionary science, that one of the major pressure points when it comes to evolution is how to have this creature gestate for as long as possible so it doesn't have to get popped out into the big bad world too soon, but also not get too big so that too many of the women die trying to birth the things. And there is this tension. If you're a physician, an OBGYN, or you're an evolutionary biologist or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. There is this tension between these two priorities: the life of the fetus slash child and the life of the mother. And nature doesn't have that shit, and the comfort of the mother and the health of the mother and all that. And nature doesn't have that shit perfectly calibrated for humans, just like it doesn't have it, certainly doesn't have it perfectly calibrated for hyenas. Okay. Nature it is a deeply flawed, actually, from a human perspective, process of what it puts us through, what it forces us to endure. And again, I know there's a lot of women who have had easy birth experiences and whatever. I'm not trying to say that it's always a horror show. But Tim Pool, when he had me on his show, we started getting into a debate about abortion. One of the things that Tim Pool brought up is that in ancient times, and I can't remember which ancient society it was that he was citing, but that in ancient times, in this society, when they would give, the only time that they would give women a similar honor in burial as the honor that they give to men who died in war, in battle, was women who died in childbirth. In other words, what he was saying is the point he was trying to make is that ancient traditional society, it has natural human society, has always understood that giving birth to a child is the highest form of female achievement. That's what Tim Pool was saying. And his argument was that earlier societies understood it was the highest form of achievement, and that's why they gave women who died in childbirth similar burial honors to men who died in battle. No, 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 no. That's not why. The reason they did that is because they knew that pregnancy and childbirth were so fucking dangerous and so fucking traumatizing, particularly in a pre-modern context. I mean, has no one seen Game of Thrones? Particularly traumatizing, the House of Dragons, I should say. Someone dies in childbirth. It's very gross. They understood these pre-modern societies. They understood how dangerous it was. When I was in grad school, I spent a lot of time studying late 18th and early 19th century literature because I was really interested in Mary Shelley, and I wrote my dissertation on Mary Shelley and the guillotine and the French Revolution and a lot of different stuff. But anyway, here's the point. I took a class one semester where we talked about the literature of motherhood and the literature of obstetrics, or pregnancy and childbirth. We talked about it a lot in that class. And so for a project, I read up on a lot of historical material about from the 17th, 18th centuries, 18th, 19th centuries, about childbirth, primitive obstetrics, the number of women who died in childbirth, complications, things like that. And I just have to say that in a pre-modern society, every woman would have gone into pregnancy and childbirth, knowing other women who died in that process. You were truly going to war when you were geared up for something like that. And nowadays, partly because of modern obstetrics and also because of the advancements of people in midwifery and so forth. And I understand not everything about modern obstetrics is good. And there's a lot of counterproductive stuff with that as well. And I really like it's a little dated, but I really like the book Misconceptions by Naomi Wolf about all of this. But we now no longer have to live with the fear of dying in childbirth in modern society, even though it actually happens more than you'd think. I've seen, strangely enough, not even looking for it, I've seen several articles in the last month about people who died in childbirth or died immediately after childbirth as a result of something that happened in childbirth. But yes, I don't personally know anyone who died in childbirth, but I'm trying to say that people like Tim Pool, and with all respect to him, is a really smart guy. We had a great conversation. I'd like to talk about it more. But people like Tim Pool or others, they have this sort of dismissive attitude of like, yeah, you're supposed to have a lot of kids, and that's what women are built for, and that's what they want to do, and that's what we've always done in traditional society, and we need to get back to that. And so then you have people like Tucker Carlson, who are seriously, with a straight face, suggesting that people should start getting married in high school, that teenagers should be wifing up and marrying together and having kids. Now, I'm the first one, y'all, to talk about how I think teenagers should have more autonomy and more of a sense of adulthood than they are given in society. And I talk about it mainly within the context of Me Too and all the people these days who moan whenever, an older man dates a woman, even an adult woman in her teens. Oh, we started dating when I was 18. I was just a baby. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't like that shit either. Okay. So I'm not against teens having a little more adulthood or empowerment than we give them in society. But it is just fucking ridiculous to tell modern people to get married and have kids in high school. And yet Tucker Carlson says it with straight face. He even says, don't worry if you can't afford it. Don't worry. So I don't know where I'm going with all of that. I actually have to leave because I have to go to work in a minute. But I am truly perplexed at this discourse online, and I understand that some of it is just extremists are going to have the loudest voice, and the most extreme opinions get the most clicks. And I talked about this. I did a video. I'll link to it below, where I talked about the trouble that Tim Pool got into last week for a comment he made about Drea De Matteo being a hooker, acting like a hooker, or what have you. Again, this kind of like this focus on female sexuality, like we're back in the 80s or something. It's just not politically helpful. It's not politically helpful. You can at least save it until after the election. But I talked about Tim Pool, and I talked about why I thought he said that. And one thing that I'm very sympathetic to him and to everyone in media about is that the nature of social media now, the nature of YouTube, the nature of podcasting is that the most extreme statements get the clicks, they get the views, they create the spectacle that people want. And so it inclines us all to be much more extreme, not only in our opinions, but in the expression of those opinions. So, that's definitely part of it. And I know that's some of what's going on here too. But I started talking about this last week. So if you want to hear more of this, I will link to it below. I really appreciate y'all for being here. And I think what I want to do next week, I'm going to read up more on birth control methods and critiques of birth control. Honestly, I did this years ago when I was trying to decide what to use myself. And by the way, I use an IUD, and I think that they're great. Some people, yes, have had bad experiences with them. I'm going to talk about all that a little later, right? Because again, we can't talk about these things in a vacuum. Yes, we can talk about the problems with different birth control methods, but also there's a whole other context here of issues with unwanted pregnancy and childbirth and all the stuff that I just talked about earlier that are hard on your body. But I want to read up more on the most up-to-date stuff on birth control methods and the science, and I just want to have a really honest discussion, less of a rant next time, but a really honest discussion, exploration of the modern state of birth control. And I have a number of people in my life saying that women, they should be encouraged more to track their cycles, and that natural basically calendar watching and temperature taking and all of that can usually work very well. Well, it's got a pretty high failure rate in practice. And I know birth control pills have a failure rate in practice as well. But if we tell a girl, take a pill or get an IUD implanted, which in my case, it's 99.9% effective, that's a little bit different than saying, okay, you need to be constantly tracking your cycles and taking your temperature and all of that. I mean, I understand women are intelligent beings, and it's not crazy to ask them to do those things, but I don't know. So I want to talk about all that. I understand that there are a number of people online who really like to rant about how women should just keep their legs closed. And in that way, it seems like a very reactionary, sort of proto-traditionist, getting back to the 80s kind of perspective or whatever, which I don't accept. I do think everybody should be generally more careful with their sexuality, right? But again, when I see men online, mostly men, sometimes women, going on rants about how people should stop having sex, I just think that it's kind of naive. Yes, there's some that won't, and younger people are having less sex now than their parents and even their grandparents. But at the same time, I think there's a certain inevitability and a certain reality here that needs to be wrestled with. And can I just remind all of y'all, women are not the only ones who are irresponsible about birth control. I've talked a lot about how I had a number of friends growing up who were irresponsible with it, and they would skip a pill or two or even three and just kind of laugh about it. And a lot of men have been tricked into pregnancy that way, and I think it's terrible. And let me just say to you men, after I've been ranting at you a lot, Don't trust a woman on birth control. I don't mean don't trust her because she's crazy because she's on birth control. No, I mean when she says to you, oh, don't worry, I've got it taken care of. I'm on birth control. That's not enough. That is not enough. Unless you really know that woman. And even then, I don't know. You know, I would make sure that you are very proactively involved in that situation too. Whatever that looks like, you know. I mean, apparently the pull-out method is pretty effective if you piss between ejaculations. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. I'll talk about that next week. We will talk about ejaculations next week. But yeah, this thing about women need to close their legs, it's like, come on, and that sentiment occurs in a vacuum as well. And you know what that vacuum is? It is a denial of the fact that it's usually men who are generally the ones pushing to have the most sex or more sex or hooking up earlier. If you took the male sex drive out of the equation, the sex does generally get reduced. You know how I know that? Is because you look at gay men having a lot more sex than lesbians. So it's also this thing of like women need to keep their legs closed, but I should have the freedom to just have, as a man, to have whatever sex I want to have and whatever. And you know, a lot of these abortions that a lot of you hate so much who are pro life, they're being paid for by men, they're being encouraged by men. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of women who actually would carry a child to term, I think, but for the lack of support that she feels she's getting. So these things are so complicated. And that's my point. They're complicated. They're things that people have been wrestling with for a while. There are generally no good, perfect, easy answers. And I just find the discourse online, particularly right now coming from the right, to be completely unmindful of that. All right. More later. Love y'all. Thank you. Bye.